Pema Chodron's teachings have touched millions of lives. And one of the reasons for that is that she teaches what she's lived and lives what she teaches. That kind of authenticity is rare, and people can feel it. Coinciding with her 90th birthday and the release of her new book, Another Kind of Freedom, Pema joins me for a wide-ranging conversation about her practice and teaching legacy, working with praise and blame, and the freedom that can emerge when we stop fighting reality. I'm your host, Ivan Berkholtz. Thank you so much for joining us here today in Boulder. Sarah and I were talking a little bit about how delightfully intertwined our lives and careers have been with your teachings and really all of the Shambhala Publications employees for the last 35 years. And we're just so genuinely touched about the benefit that your teachings have brought into the world and being a small part of that. So thank you for continuing that legacy with us.
Yeah.
And you turn 90 very soon.
Yeah.
And we will release this interview on your 90th birthday. And as that milestone comes up, what does your life look like at this point, like at this very moment? You've kind of wound down the major part of your teaching career and slowed that a little bit. So what does an average day look like in your life, and what are you prioritizing these days?
Well, I want to begin by saying that several years ago, I spent a lot of time in retreat.
Yeah.
At least 100 days a year, and usually quite a bit more than that. So several years ago, as I was ending one of the retreats and about to go up to Gampo Abbey, I was thinking, I had these thoughts about winding down. I remember that was the expression. And when I would think winding down, it was so soothing and comforting and sweet. Oh, winding down. And then right about that time, I had a luncheon with Anam Thupten Rinpoche, and he said at the end of it, he got very close and he said, "You don't need to be doing any more retreat. You've done a lot of retreat. You need to teach." So when he said that, I knew he was right, So then a year later, I said to him, "Rinpoche, when we met last year and you said this, I really took it to heart, and I took it very seriously." And he got very close again. He said, "You have to teach until you die." So that's the answer to the question, really. So I do spend a lot of time in retreat, and that's very renewing, and refreshing. And I think without that, I really couldn't do the teaching. And I do a lot less teaching. I don't have the stamina to do like a full weekend.
Yeah.
But as you know, Ivan, because we've worked together on this so often, I do a 6-week retreat, teach a 6-week retreat every year. And I'm planning to do it the next year, even though it's quite a trek because from Colorado to Nova Scotia,
Right.
But so I do that, and then you make that into a beautiful course every year. I do a talk for Zigor Kuntrell every year at NSS. Various other things pop up that I do.
Yeah.
And also, because of what Anam Thupten Rinpoche said, I got the idea of doing the Q&A.
Right.
And Shambhala took it on beautifully and made it happen. And I think we're into our 3rd year on that one. So that's what I'm sort of doing, I guess.
And then in between the activity, you rejuvenate with the practice, or you're like more in a practice mode.
And I try to practice every day, really.
Yeah.
But it's sort of quite different to go into deep retreat.
Yeah.
I also spend time with my family every year. So at least 6 weeks.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Great. So in the new book, Another Kind of Freedom, which is a commentary on Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's Myth of Freedom, the word freedom is not necessarily used in the standard parlance of how we'd use it in ordinary conversation. What is meant by freedom and another kind of freedom and myth of freedom? What is that kind of freedom referring to?
people puzzle over the name myth of freedom. You know,
Yeah.
what does that mean? So I gave it quite a bit of thought, and with my editor Joey Waxman, we talked about it quite a bit. And the idea of freedom in the ordinary sense, that you escape one thing and you get to have the other thing, some more conventionally so. And in the book, I think, or somewhere, I tell this story about a man who wrote to me that was in prison for many years.
Yeah.
And he said that he longed to get out. He longed to be able to walk on the beach. He longed to be able to see the stars at night. He longed to be able to do all these things. And it was a tremendous wish for that kind of freedom, and understandably. But then he said, but when I got out, and after I had been out a while, I realized that the same suffering that I had been experiencing was still there and hadn't been lost. So that's kind of the conventional idea of freedom. And then another kind of freedom would be like, he asked me for advice, you know, and he said, and I'm wondering if Buddhism would have anything, could help me in any way on this. So the other kind of freedom, you work with your mind, and you go deeper. Like an interview I did recently, I was talking about foreground and background. And it's more like, instead of always working at the level of conventional reality or foreground, you touch in with something that's always there, never goes away, but is always available to us, which the metaphor is like space or like sky. And of course, that kind of freedom is unconditional, I guess you could say.
Maybe different than the idea of escapism or like trying to get away from something in freedom, but more like, how would you counter that as like?
Well, if I wanted to use your language, then maybe conventional freedom, we could say, would be trying to escape something, to get relief from something. And this kind of freedom is not based on external circumstances. And is not really actually the opposite of escaping anything. This is one of the big themes, of course, in the book, and on a lot of my teachings. Maybe it's the main one, right? Is an intimacy and a close relationship with whatever is happening. Agreeable, disagreeable doesn't matter. Pleasant, unpleasant doesn't matter. You move closer, and so really you're learning how not to escape, you know, in a way, how to relax with, move closer to, make friends with. I like the word intimacy, becoming intimate with. And in a way, it's like no separation from what's happening, you know. So Buddhism, and if you talk about Buddhist philosophy, would talk about non-dualism. But that's philosophy, and people don't usually say, what does that have to do with my life? But it actually has a lot to do with our lives, because every time we choose not to get caught in good, bad thinking, polarizing thinking, right, wrong thinking, we're moving closer to a non-dual experience of reality.
It's so interesting. I think of like what makes your teachings hit people in the heart so much is that it's not, of course it's informed by Buddhist philosophy, and it is teaching Buddhist philosophy, but it's so experiential. It's not something that we're putting out here as this thing that we're working with other than ourselves. It really brings it home and into our being. Is that something that you have been very intentional about, or is it just what comes naturally to how
I haven't been all that intentional, actually. But this is directly from Trungpa Rinpoche. Absolutely, unquestionably, one of the main things that I internalized from his teachings, and the experience of him as a person. I think it hasn't been intentional. It's just been speaking what I understood from what I'd been taught, and it sort of came out this way, you know. And it actually, I think it hasn't been until sort of recently that I realized how much that's what it's all been about. because for years people always assumed that it was all about bodhicitta, because I taught about that a lot.
Yeah.
And they associated me with Tonglen, bodhicitta and things.
Right.
But this was always what really, this moving closer, this not pulling back, this joining with. In the book, Myth of Freedom, and I talk about a lot in my commentary, another kind of freedom, Rinpoche uses the term one with continually, you know? And so that's a kind of word that for years I had no idea what he was talking about, and certainly not the profundity of what he was talking about. But now, having spent a lot of time with the book, I just realized how profound and advanced, if you want to say, the teachings that he gave in that book were. And it was his attempt to give us the best right from the beginning. But of course, for all of us that were his students, it takes a long time to digest this. However, I do feel that people coming in new now, they're way ahead of where we were, of course, when we entered, or where I was anyway. And so people are at a great advantage, I think, because Western teachers are teaching it in a way that makes it experiential and comprehensible. Right. And when Trungpa Rinpoche came into my life, which was, you know, when I think with his very first book, it was just like this bombshell of like, wow, someone really speaking directly. Because at least for me, all Buddhism had been this really conceptual, interesting, but had nothing to do with my life or anyone's life. That's how it felt to me, you know. So Trungpa Rinpoche was just astounding, really. And still, I feel he's still way ahead of his times.
Yeah.
You know, that honestly, no one has quite caught up. No. But, you know.
But I so appreciate that you continue that legacy, and your teachings are a different gateway to that same wisdom, and that legacy. And so to get into that a little bit, there's a real sense of humility in the subtitle of the book. You know, that it's called A Student's Commentary on the Myth of Freedom. And while all of your teachings are rooted in your experience with your teachers and what you've received to your teachers, I was so touched by this book in particular, and the recent courses we've worked on, that they're really an homage to Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings and what you received from him. And while this kind of quality is somewhat a part of the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, is like that kind of reverence and deference to our teachers. In the Western world, that's quite uncommon. You know, somebody who has a certain amount of esteem or experience might mention their teachers, but I'd love to hear a little bit of your experience with the Myth of Freedom in the first place, and then why, as you know, an almost 90-year-old, why you chose to write a student's commentary.
Actually, the book is all my books are based on transcripts. You know, I do a certain amount of writing, for sure, but it all comes from courses that I've given over the years. I taught on the Myth of Freedom in Berkeley, California for 6 weeks. So I was inspired then because I had just done a commentary on Shantideva's Bodhicharyavatara, the way of the Bodhisattva, and I thought I'd love to do a commentary on Trungpa Rinpoche because, you know, of course. So I wanted to do either Myth of Freedom or Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. And honestly, at the time, I thought, I don't think I really understand either one of these books, you know? And so I thought Myth of Freedom was a little more easy to understand. And so I set out, you know, to do it. And of course, in the course of the 6 weeks teaching, I began to understand the book, really understand the book. And I think the same would have been if I had chosen Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. But there were times when Joey and I, my editor and I, would spend a couple of hours on the phone trying to figure out what Trungpa Rinpoche was saying in a certain place. It might just be half a chapter or something, but we found it fascinating and really fun, to explore. But it wasn't always evident to us exactly what he was saying.
Yeah.
But we really we worked on it,
Well, I think if it were completely evident, it wouldn't need the commentary.
Maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. Yeah. Now, that's a good point, because I must say, when I thought about giving a commentary on it, same with Shantideva, it wasn't really that it needed my commentary particularly, but or any commentary, but for the student, it's so valuable to do it, It's like having a book club or a study group or something,
Yeah, and you're bringing so many people to this work who wouldn't necessarily otherwise. You're giving them the entryway into it. Do you remember your experience of encountering Myth of Freedom earlier in your life? Was it one of the early texts of Rinpoche's that you encountered?
Oh, yeah.
Will you tell me a little story
I
about
encountered them as they were published, And I was actually spending a lot of time during that period of my life in England at a meditation center there that was the center of Lama Chime Rinpoche, who died recently. He was my first teacher. So we would all be eagerly waiting the next book to come out. So after Cutting Through came Myth of Freedom. And we just devoured it. And at the time, I think we all thought we understood. Yeah. I guess it's only as I understand more that I somehow had to grapple with the material more, because it's so profound, a lot of the things he says, and so helpful, the instructions, so helpful.
I find that that's so often the beauty of a really well-written Dharma book, is it has the layers that kind of unfold as you experience in your practice as you go through those things, it speaks to you differently over time. One of the things that I appreciate about you the most and admire about you is that you seem to feel truly joyful. And I can tell the people who are watching this that this is not facade. I've now spent a lot of time with you over the last 15 years. Yeah,
right.
And it's true. The hype is real. And you have a pretty constant barrage of praise and blame thrown at you, as anyone in public does.
Yeah.
And I was reflecting recently about how I used to not think I had a big problem with ego, and I really do. and I'm so affected by the wave of praise and blame in my life. Can you tell a little bit about how you worked with maintaining a joyful mind and working with praise and blame?
Well, I'm very human, so I don't get pumped up by the praise that much anymore, because I'll tell you, it's so superficial. Yeah. I tell this story about being in an airport. It was kind of a common experience. This woman comes up to me when we're waiting to get on the plane, and she just gushes and she says how I changed, I saved her life, and if there's ever anything I can do for you, I would just go out of my way, and on and on. So we go on, we get on the plane, and then it's time to get off the plane, and I'm struggling to get my bag down, and she comes by, rushing by, and I said, "Could you help me get my bag back?" No, she says, I'm in a big hurry. I thought, wow, is that ever perfect, and so I kind of feel that way about praise. So then blame, there's a sting for sure. Yeah. But it's as superficial as the praise. So in that way, I honestly don't take either one too seriously. And that's not because of my advanced practice or something. I think it's just realistic that I just don't take it too seriously. And I have a granddaughter who's now in early 30s, and she loves to tell me goes out of her way to tell me all these things online. Like she said, do you know that there's a whole web page devoted to what's wrong with Pema Chodron? She loves to tell me all the dirt. Otherwise, actually, I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
So I hear about it from her, and then, of course, we get letters and all these kind of things. But anyway, just the main point being that I don't take it too seriously. I don't take it too seriously. And more, especially the blame part, it comes from such a confused place, and there's so much pain behind it. Not that it's sometimes maybe not accurate or something, but I don't know, when so much hatred in it, I feel a lot of pain for the people that are, who it's coming from, because that much hatred towards a 90-year-old nun, it's really kind of ridiculous.
Is that like, do you use that as like a way to generate compassion for, like, instead of taking it as something that's offensive, you're then
I think
feeling
sort of
for the
happens
people?
like,
Okay,
like
it happens
that.
like that's the natural.
Yeah. Because if when you feel that kleshas take you over, when I feel kleshas take me over, it's so much misery. So I call that unnecessary suffering, right? And so when you see people causing themselves so much unnecessary suffering, whether it's letters or friends, I guess I easily put myself in their shoes. And
You've gone through quite a progression in your life, from being a householder and a mother to being a grandmother and a monastic and a student and a teacher. How much of what you're doing now and the way that you're teaching is for that generation of your grandchildren, and what kinds of things are you trying to impart for that younger generation at this point in time?
I don't think too much about generations.
Okay.
I'm not trying to gear it toward a certain generation. I do check it out with my grandchildren. How does this land? Is it of any interest? That kind of thing. And I would be really overjoyed I am overjoyed when I hear younger people interested in it, but it's not my focus, I guess. My focus is just whatever, it's a sort of passion for the Dharma that I've received, and how incredibly valuable it is, and wanting to pass it on. And so whatever age you're in, that's relevant.
Humans are humans.
Humans are humans, that's right.
Age,
And and also I'm not tuned in enough to really everything's moving so fast. I certainly don't have the vocabulary except occasionally because of one of the grandchildren. So I am not emphasizing that, but just teaching the Dharma.
Thank goodness you're not talking like they do on TikTok.
I've never tuned into TikTok.
Great. One of the things I've loved about Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche's teachings, and in turn yours, is that they break our concepts of expectations in spirituality. And in the chapter on disappointment, I want to read this quote and just get your reflections on it.
Okay.
This is from The Myth of Freedom. We expect the teachings to solve all our problems. We expect to be provided with magical means to deal with our depressions, our aggression, our sexual hang-ups. But to our surprise, we begin to realize that this is not going to happen. This is in the chapter on disappointment.
Right.
And disappointment's not something you usually think of as a quality to work with,
right,
in the spiritual path. Can you speak a little bit about the quality of disappointment and what this refers to and why it's helpful to contemplate?
Well, the thing I want to emphasize first is how Trungpa Rinpoche would take something that it's superficial or colloquial understanding was negative and turn it into something positive. And the two that come up in the book, Myth of Freedom, and so also my commentary, is boredom and disappointment. And there may be others, but those are the two that come to mind. What he says about disappointment, if I remember correctly, is disappointment is a wonderful thing because it doesn't have any ego in it.
Right.
There's no ego reinforcement in disappointment. So I think that's the pith of it, really, of how he emphasizes it. With boredom, he says that it's a sign that you're really progressing on the path. See, that's what's so interesting about both these words, is that they are signposts. He presents them as signposts for awakening, signposts for understanding more clearly what's really valuable. So it turns it on its head. And so I think that's part of its power, right? Is that it takes something that has a negative connotation and turns it into something that's considered extremely valuable for the spiritual practitioner. So disappointment is that if you're holding on to expectations and you're caught in hope and fear, then you're always going to be disappointed. And the fact is that that disappointment shows you that you've been holding on to hope and fear, and that you have, instead of letting the future be open, you're trying to control it and have it turn out to be a certain way. So disappointment is like a bell that goes off that shows you, oh, I'm doing it again. I'm doing it again. I'm trying to get everything under control. I'm trying to have it be just the way I want it, trying to live in the comfort zone. And then disappointment says, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working. And it never will work. It never will work. You have to, let the disappointment show you and lead you more towards an open, unpredetermined, uncontrolling, if that's a word, uncontrolling, way of living your life, so that you let things unfold and you act accordingly. So, for instance, when we were establishing Gampo Abbey, my instructions from Trungpa Rinpoche were make small moves and see what happens. And that's more, I would say, that in that way you're never disappointed. Because everything, that's another expression from Trungpa Rinpoche that I quote a lot, but live your life as an experiment. So you're never disappointed because you never had a preconceived notion of what it was going to be.
So it's like working with a fixed mindset.
It is working with a fixed mindset, exactly. And of course, the thing is, of course, you will be disappointed because you will do that. And then so it's showing you where you're at. Instead of an unfixated mindset, you've had a fixed mindset. Instead of not concretizing, you're concretizing, etc.
I'm looking forward to being disappointed.
And bored.
I'm bored, exactly. So the last question about the book that I'd like to ask you is about working with people. And there's a chapter in here, I think it's called Working with People.
I think so,
Yeah, working with people.
Yeah.
I find this really hard. And people are the joy of life and also the most difficult thing.
Yes.
I was talking with one of the managers in our company at some point. I think she managed about 10 people, and she said, my job would be really easy if it weren't for the people.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So I just wanted to read this little section, the first little bit.
Isn't there somebody who said something like hell is other people or something?
That sounds right. Yeah. Joy and hell. It's like such a double-edged sword in that way.
Yeah.
But I love how it's presented here.
Yeah. What does it say?
This section is about how to benefit other people. The precision and openness he talks about in work and what he says about dancing in love apply to a wide variety of life situations, including being of genuine benefit to others. All of this requires maturity. It requires loving kindness towards ourselves, trust in ourselves. Here, Rinpoche says that poor communication is the result of feeling bad about ourselves. I think that's one to write in your notebook. When we feel bad about ourselves, we feel we need to put barbed wire around our territory for protection. And so just this idea of how to work with people skillfully through the lens of what's taught in here. Can you speak a little bit about that? Because I've seen you do it so well. I mean, I feel like it's like a city of yours.
Okay. I'm going to use an image that apparently I used to use a lot, and a student was just reminding me of this, and I had forgotten it completely. But it's a good one on this one. So in the Mahayana teachings, there's an expression of inviting all sentient beings as your guests, which is an alarming idea when you really think about it, because of the word all, you know, that means everyone. And that you don't have no guest lists, no one's turned away. And so when you think about it, you say that sounds traumatizing just to think about it, you know. Apparently the image that I used, which now when I hear about it, I think is wonderful, which was you open the door, but you only open it as far as it feels comfortable or safe or something like that. And you let that much in. And then if it's too much, you give yourself permission to close the door. But your intention and your aspiration is to be able, in the course of your lifetime, to open the door more and more and more. So maybe I work that way, you know, like not just opening the door, let everything flood in, and then you basically can't do anything. You get completely flattened by the situation, and it brings up a lot of emotion and stuff that you don't want to go anywhere near, etc. So you do it just by opening the door just a little bit and bring in what you can bring in. And of course, you don't always get a choice. That's probably what you're referring to. But still, it's helpful to know what your capacity is in terms of how much you can handle. And so you don't want to live in the comfort zone. The growth happens when you're challenged. So you have to sort of weigh that against the fact that if you let the door open too much, then you're helpless. You can't do anything. It's just overwhelming and you're not functioning anymore. And you're definitely not there for people. So if your life's work intention is to be there for other people, no matter how challenging it is, what they're telling you or showing you or saying to you, if your life's intention is to always be there for other people, then if that's your the direction you want to go in the course of your life, well, then you have to do it in a way that your nervous system can get used to what it feels like to have too much coming your way too soon. Too much criticism, too much praise, too much overload of your energy can't handle it. So for instance, I've gotten really good at, because I had chronic fatigue for over 20 years, so I got really good at saying no and not taking on too much. And then I still, because I'm kind of had a lot of karma energy or accomplishing kind of energy, I would still go beyond my capacity, but then every time it happened, I learned. So now that I'm 90, I've learned a lot in the course of my life, and I can see, I take on and I say, I can't do it anymore. You know, I taught at Omega for years. I would teach Friday night, all day Saturday, 2 classes, and then a class on Sunday. I got to a point where I said, you know, I think I better just do Friday night, 1 on Saturday, 1 on Sunday. Then it got to the point, I kept doing less and less, and finally I said, I don't think I can do weekends anymore. But rather than that be a heartbreaker or something, it was just a kind of natural acknowledging, you know. And I have some good role models in my family. For instance, my older sister, who's passed now, but she was a big hiker, and then she was getting older and older, and something happened. Her balance or something, she couldn't hike. So she said, it doesn't matter, I can still ride my bike. Then years went on, then she couldn't ride her bike. She said, it doesn't matter, I still have my book club. So it was sort of like she just let things go. Yeah. So that was a good role model for me. And I think that's part of this whole thing, getting pretty far away from your question, but nevertheless, that you train in the course of your life of letting go.
Thank you for explaining that a little bit.
You're welcome.
And just as one last note, I've been ending these kinds of interviews with asking teachers who've had a long course of practice in their life, who've gone through many traditional practices and a lot of study, later in their lives, what stands out, and what do you work with on a day-to-day level in your contemplations, in your practice? Is there like a certain aspect of the teachings that's become particularly potent for you at this stage of your life?
Well, at this stage of my life, I still have strong aspirations to be of benefit to other people. So I still work on obstacles to that in my own personality, klesha, reactivity, and things. So that's always kind of in the background. But I've been working with Dzigar Khantrul Rinpoche since 1999 with the Dzogchen teachings, and which primarily are a nature of mind, free from fixed mind completely, living life free from fixed mind. That might be one way you could say. And so that's my main passion and interest, and that's the direction of my own personal practice. So, for instance, I make the aspiration every morning that I could live that way during the day, not be caught in the drama of life, not caught in the aspects of life that can so easily bring us up and drop us down and so forth. So that's an aspiration. And then I keep tuning in with space, bigger picture, dropping fixed mind over and over hundreds of times, And so, boy, that is really a practice you can just take with you anywhere, anytime. Doesn't need shrines or pictures or anything, And I feel so fortunate to have come upon it. So it was how many ever years ago? So that's like 27 years ago. So I've kind of grown up in it, I guess you could say. So that's where I'm at right now.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for doing this, Amitabha. It's been a real delight to have the opportunity to sit down with you in this way.
Thank you, Ivan.
Yeah, thank you. Cut.